The stray dog followed him home. What happened next changed them both. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with fanfare or warning. They come quietly, slowly, like the last light of an afternoon, fading so gently you almost don't notice it's gone. This is a story about one of those moments. It's about a man who was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that settles into your bones when life has asked too much of you for too long. And it's about a dog, a thin, dusty street dog with gentle eyes and no name. A dog who had known hunger, who had known cold pavements and passing feet that never stopped, who had learned, slowly, not to expect very much from the world. For a long time, neither of them had a reason to hope. But one quiet evening, their paths crossed, and something small began. Not a rescue, not a dramatic moment, just a door, left slightly open, and a decision made not in one night but across many mornings, many silences, many small and ordinary acts of kindness, to let something in. This is that story. It ends somewhere warm. Stay with it. Some evenings feel heavier than others. There is no reason for it. The sky is the same sky. The streets are the same streets. But something in the air, something you can't quite name, makes each step feel a little slower, a little heavier, like the world is asking you to carry more than your share tonight. Marcus didn't know why this particular Tuesday felt that way. He was 47 years old. He had a job. He had a small apartment on the third floor of a building with a broken elevator. He had a few photographs on the wall and a coffee maker that needed replacing. His life was not dramatic. It was not terrible. It was simply quiet. The kind of quiet that, over time, begins to feel less like peace and more like absence. He walked home the long way, as he sometimes did when he wasn't ready to face the emptiness of his apartment just yet, down Elmwood Avenue, past the old hardware store with the faded green awning, past the corner bakery that closed at 6, past a small park where pigeons gathered in the early morning. The October air was cool, not cold enough to be unpleasant, but cool enough to remind you that something was changing. The leaves on the sidewalk were the color of rust and old paper. They moved softly when he passed. Marcus walked slowly. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. Sometimes that's the most dangerous kind of thinking, when the mind goes quiet and the heart gets loud. He had been on his own for 3 years now, since Claire had moved to Portland and taken the good lamp and most of the warmth from the apartment. It hadn't been a dramatic ending. That was almost the hardest part. There were no great arguments, no final door slamming, no movie scene goodbye. Just a slow, mutual understanding that two people can care about each other and still not be right for one another. He understood it. He had accepted it. But some evenings, walking home with nothing waiting for him but the hum of a refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's television, he felt it. That hollow space, the one that's shaped exactly like another person. He turned onto Birch Street, and that's when he noticed the dog. It was behind him. Not close. Maybe 15-20 feet back. Just a shape at first. A thin, dusty shape, moving at the same slow pace he was moving. He didn't stop. He didn't turn around fully. He just noticed it. The way you notice something at the edge of your vision and file it away. A stray, he thought. Poor thing. He kept walking, but when he glanced back a minute later, the dog was still there. Same distance. Same quiet pace. Not begging. Not barking. Not rushing forward. Just walking. Moving through the same cool October air beneath the same amber streetlights, along the same rust-colored leaves. As if it had simply decided that this direction was as good as any other, Marcus turned back to face the road ahead. He didn't slow down. He didn't speed up, but something very small and very quiet shifted inside him. He became aware of the sound of his own footsteps and the soft, barely audible sound of 4 more just behind him. The street was empty. The world was still. And 2 lives, both a little tired, both a little lost, moved through the evening together without either of them saying a word. Some things don't need words to begin. They just begin. And sometimes, what begins quietly is the thing that changes everything. Every story has a before, the part that doesn't appear in photographs. The part no one really talks about, but it's always there, in the posture of a person, in the way a dog flinches at a sudden sound, in the small invisible weight that both of them carry without quite knowing they're carrying it. Marcus grew up in a house with a dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, which he had named at age 6 and which he had been mildly embarrassed about by age 12 and which he had loved, quietly and completely, until Biscuit died the summer before he left for college. He remembered lying on the kitchen floor with Biscuit in the evenings, doing homework, one hand absent-mindedly resting on the dog's warm flank. He remembered the weight of that warmth, the steadiness of it. He had wanted a dog for years. Living alone, the thought had crossed his mind more times than he could count. But apartments had rules, and life had a way of making things complicated. And somewhere along the way, someday had become its own kind of answer, the one you give yourself when you're not ready to say no, but you're not quite able to say yes. He worked at a mid-sized architecture firm downtown. He was good at his job. Not brilliant, he would have told you that himself without bitterness, but careful, thorough, the kind of person who gets things right. His colleagues respected him. A few of them liked him, but the office was the kind of place where everyone was busy enough that real friendship required an effort no one quite had the energy for at the end of a long day. He had a sister in Ohio. They texted on birthdays and holidays. He had 2 or 3 friends from his earlier years, the kind of friendships maintained by occasional dinners and the shared understanding that everyone was just trying to keep their own lives together. It was a life. A good one in many ways, stable, quiet, respectable. But there was a softness missing from it, a warmth that no amount of routine or professionalism or politely exchanged weekend texts could quite provide. He didn't talk about this. Men of his generation, in his particular corner of the world, rarely did. You got on with things. You made the most of what you had. You didn't dwell. But some evenings exactly like this one, the dwelling happened anyway. Now, as for the dog. If Marcus had it before, so did she. She was a mixed-breed female, somewhere between 3 and 5 years old, though no one would know that for certain until much later. Medium-sized, a coat that might have been described as sandy gold in better days, but was now more the color of dry earth and old shadow. Her ribs were just visible beneath her coat. Not alarmingly so, but enough to tell a story. Her eyes were dark brown, and they were the eyes of an animal that had learned to read people very carefully, had learned to tell in seconds whether a human was worth approaching or better avoided. She had been on the streets for at least a year, perhaps longer. She had survived on whatever the city offered. Scraps near the back of the sandwich shop on 5th, half-eaten things left on park benches, the occasional kindness of someone who paused long enough to set something down. She had been shooed away more times than she could count, chased off by shopkeepers, ignored by the hundreds of people who walked past her every day without a second glance. She had learned the rhythms of the city the way a sailor learns the rhythms of the sea, not from choice, but from necessity. She wasn't bitter. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing about dogs. She was simply patient. She had learned to wait, to watch, to read the temperature of a moment before moving, and on that particular Tuesday evening, something in the way Marcus walked had spoken to her in a language she understood. Not the language of offering, not the language of call or whistle or name, the language of being alone. She recognized it, she knew it from the inside, and so she followed. Not because she expected anything, but because something in her, something old and instinctive and quietly certain, told her that this particular human, on this particular evening, was worth walking beside. She didn't know his name, she didn't know his story, but she had chosen him, and she was not the kind to choose lightly. The city at night belongs to different things than the city in the day. In the day, it belongs to movement, to purpose, to the long parade of people with places to go and reasons to go there. The sound of it is loud and layered, engines, voices, construction, music escaping from open restaurant doors. But at night, the city slows, and in that slowness, the things that go unnoticed in the daytime begin to come forward. The pigeons finding ledges, the raccoon moving through the backlot, the cats watching from behind dumpsters, and the dogs. The street dogs of any city occupy a parallel world, one that exists alongside the human world but is almost entirely invisible to it. They know routes that no map records. They know which restaurant kitchens leave scraps near the back door by 9. They know which park bench is sheltered from the wind. They know the sound of a kind voice versus a warning voice, and they learn after enough repetitions that the warning comes more often. She had built her world carefully, the way all survivors do. By the time she found Marcus, she had a loose territory, a few blocks near the edge of Birch Street in Elmwood. She knew the bakery, the one Marcus passed every evening, because the woman who owned it, a heavy-set woman named Helen, who wore floral aprons and had a soft spot she would never admit to, sometimes left the end-of-day bread near the side door. Not always, but enough. She knew the park 3 blocks east, where the drinking fountain leaked slightly and formed a small persistent puddle near its base. She drank there in the mornings. She knew a gap between 2 buildings on Marconi Lane where the space was just wide enough for her body and just sheltered enough from rain and wind that she could sleep through most nights without waking cold. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She knew it completely. She had learned through long experience how to disappear in a crowd, how to make herself small and unthreatening, how to approach a potential source of food without startling anyone, how to read in the posture and pace of a human being, whether they were the kind who would lean down and offer a hand, or the kind who would wave her off. She had been petted exactly twice in the past year. Once by a young girl who had run toward her before her mother could stop her, and who had grabbed her face with both small hands and said, "Puppy," with such pure delight that she had stood very still, absorbing it, the way you absorb sunlight on a cold day. Once by an old man with a shopping cart who had crouched down slowly and scratched behind her left ear for approximately 45 seconds, and then stood back up and moved on without a word. She remembered both of these moments. She did not understand time the way humans do. She did not have language for yesterday, or last Tuesday, or a year ago. But she carried things, the way all living things carry things, in the body, in the nervous system, in the place behind the eyes where experience becomes instinct. She carried the memory of kindness, and she carried, perhaps more than anything else, the knowledge that it was possible, that it existed, that somewhere in the long, unpredictable stream of human beings moving through her world, there were hands that would be gentle and voices that would be soft. She was looking for one of those. She didn't rush. She had learned very early that rushing ruined things. So she waited, and on the evening she first followed Marcus home, she was not acting on hope exactly. She was acting on something quieter than hope, something more careful. A kind of recognition. She had watched him cross through her territory twice before, on the 2 previous Tuesdays when he had taken the long way home. She had noticed him the way she noticed everything, carefully, completely, without his knowledge. The way he walked. Slow, unbothered, not aggressive, not distracted by a phone, just present in his own quiet way. The absence of threat. The faint smell of sadness which animals read in humans far more accurately than humans ever know. She understood sadness. She had lived alongside it for a long time, and so, on the 3rd Tuesday, when he turned down Birch Street again, she made a decision. She rose from her step, and she followed, not close enough to startle him, just close enough to be there, which sometimes is the most important distance of all. She waited outside his door for most of that first night, not whimpering, not scratching at the wood, not making any of the sounds that might have prompted him to open the door and chase her away. She simply sat and waited. This is perhaps the thing that is hardest to explain about certain animals, about certain dogs in particular. The quality of their waiting. It isn't passive, exactly. It isn't resignation. It's something more deliberate than that, something with a kind of dignity to it. She had chosen this spot. She intended to be here. She was not confused about this. Inside the apartment, Marcus made himself dinner, pasta with something from a jar. He ate standing at the kitchen counter, the way he often did when it was just him and there was no reason to set a place at the table. He watched the news for 20 minutes. He read a few pages of a novel he'd been meaning to finish for 2 months. He did the small, ordinary things that fill the space of an evening when there is no one to talk to and nothing urgent to attend to. He did not open the door, but he thought about the dog. He thought about it while washing his single plate and his single glass. He thought about it while brushing his teeth. He thought about it when he lay in bed, and the apartment was quiet in that particular way, that late-night apartments are quiet, the hum of the city outside, the occasional distant siren, the voice of someone 2 floors up moving from one room to another. It'll be gone by morning, he told himself. He believed this. It was the sensible thing to believe. Strays moved through cities all the time. They followed things for a while and then found something better to follow. He went to sleep. In the morning, he opened his front door to get the newspaper. He still had the paper delivered, one of the small habits he'd never given up. And the dog was there, curled on the welcome mat. She lifted her head when the door opened. She looked at him directly. She did not rush toward him. She simply looked, with those careful, dark eyes, as if to say, "Still here." "Oh," Marcus said. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked up the newspaper. Then he went back inside and closed the door. He stood in his kitchen with the folded newspaper in his hand and thought about this for a while. Then he found an old Tupperware container. He filled it with water from the tap. He opened the door again and set it on the step beside her. She looked at the container, then at him, then at the container again. She drank. He watched her for a moment. Then he went inside. He did not feed her. He had read somewhere, or perhaps he simply told himself he had read somewhere, that feeding a stray was the wrong thing to do, that it encouraged dependency, that strays should be left to their own devices. He went to work. He thought about her during the commute. He thought about her during the 11 o'clock meeting about zoning regulations. He thought about her, briefly, while eating his lunch sandwich, and then felt slightly ridiculous for thinking about a dog. When he came home that evening, she was there, not on the welcome mat this time. She had moved to the top of the 2 steps that led to his landing, where she was partially sheltered from the afternoon wind by the overhang. She had been there, he suspected, most of the day. She must be hungry, he thought. He went inside. He stood in his kitchen again. He opened the refrigerator. He looked at its contents for a while. He found a piece of plain-cooked chicken left from 2 nights ago. He took it to the door and set it on the step. She ate it, not frantically, not the way a very hungry animal eats when fear of losing the food overrides everything else. Carefully, with a kind of measured gratitude. When she finished, she looked up at him again. He went inside. This became the pattern for the first week. Water in the morning, food in the evening, brief, wordless exchanges at the door. No invitation, no contact, just the small, careful acknowledgement that she was there and that he, in some practical way, was aware of it. He told himself this was not the same as adopting her. He told himself she would probably move on eventually. He told himself he was simply being a decent person, not doing anything unusual, not opening any doors he wasn't prepared to open. But every evening he came home, and every evening she was there. And that, as it turned out, was more than enough to change a person. Slowly. Quietly. The way all real changes happen. Time is a patient teacher. It doesn't announce its lessons. It doesn't arrive with instructions. It simply passes, day by day, morning by morning, and leaves things slightly different than they were before. October became November. The air turned sharper. The mornings arrived later and left earlier. And by the time Marcus walked home from work, the sky was already dark, a deep, rich navy blue that made the streetlights seem warmer by contrast. The leaves that had carpeted Birch Street when this all began were gone now, swept into piles by the Parks Department and taken away, leaving the sidewalks clean and cold. She was still there. He had begun, without quite deciding to think of her as his. Not in any formal way. Not in any way he would have said out loud, but in the way you think of a particular tree you pass every morning as belonging to the walk. In the way you think of a song that always plays at a certain hour as belonging to the day. She had become part of his routine. He bought proper dog food, dry kibble from the grocery store, nothing fancy, and kept a small bowl near the door for water that he refreshed every morning before work. He had found a piece of folded fleece, an old blanket he'd never quite gotten around to donating, and left it near the wall beside his step, folded twice in the most sheltered spot. She slept on it. He had learned her rhythms. She was usually there when he left in the morning, either on the mat or on the fleece, depending on the temperature. She was always there when he came home. On the evenings he was late, a dinner with a colleague, a project that ran over. She was still there when he arrived, lifting her head the same way she always did, steady and unhurried, as if time worked differently for her than it did for him. She had begun to let him touch her. Not immediately. That had taken time, too. The first contact happened on a cold Thursday evening in mid-November. He had crouched to set down her food bowl, and she had leaned forward very slightly and touched her nose to the back of his hand. Quickly. A brief, deliberate gesture. He went very still. She pulled back, watched him. He slowly turned his hand, palm up. She looked at it. Then she leaned forward again and rested her chin in his hand. Just for a moment, just long enough for him to feel the weight of her, warm and real and careful. Then she straightened up and looked at her food. He sat back on his heels and said very quietly, "Hello." She glanced at him. Then she ate. He stayed crouched there for a while after, in the cold evening air, doing nothing in particular. November became December. He had started talking to her. Not long conversations, not the kind of thing someone listening from inside would have heard as anything meaningful. Just small, quiet narrations. Cold tonight, had a long day. That system they approved downtown is going to be a nightmare in 5 years. The things you say when you want the sound of your own voice to mean something, even when there's no one to hear. She listened the way dogs listen, with her whole body, head slightly tilted, eyes on his face. He had never felt listened to quite like that before. He began spending more time at the door in the evenings, not going out, just sitting in the doorway, his side on the inside, her side on the outside, talking quietly or simply sitting together in the shared silence of the neighborhood at night. He would make coffee. He would bring it to the door. He would drink it slowly while she sat nearby. December became January. The snow came. He found her one morning pressed against the wall in the small shelter of the overhang, shivering. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded action, but enough. He stood in the doorway for a long time. The snow fell softly on Birch Street. He went inside. He came back with the fleece blanket. He spread it just inside the doorway, just barely inside, just past the threshold. He stepped back. She looked at the blanket. She looked at him. She looked at the blanket again. Very slowly she stood up. She stepped inside. She circled once and lay down on the blanket. He sat in the armchair across the room and looked at her for a long time. The apartment didn't feel the same. Something had entered it, not just a dog. Something that had been missing for a long time, something the man hadn't known until now, that he'd been keeping the door closed against. The smallest things were the ones that stayed with him. The sound of her breathing, he hadn't expected that. But in those first nights when she slept on the blanket just inside the door, he would lie awake in the quiet of the apartment and hear it. Slow, deep, steady. The absolute trustfulness of a sleeping dog. The sound of a creature that had, for the first time in a long while, decided it was safe to rest completely. He slept better those nights than he had in months. There is something the science of sleep doesn't fully explain. The way the presence of another living thing in a room, even when that living thing is unconscious, even when it makes no demands and issues no opinions, changes the quality of the air, the quality of the silence, makes it less hollow, more inhabited. The apartment was the same apartment, the same peeling paint on the hallway baseboard he kept meaning to fix, the same coffee maker, the same 2 photographs on the wall, one of Biscuit from when Marcus was 10, which he had kept without quite knowing why, one of a hiking trail in Vermont, where he had spent a single very good weekend a few years ago. But something had changed about it. He felt it most in the mornings. Before, waking up had been a mechanical thing. Alarm, coffee, shower, door. The sequence of a man moving through his own life without any particular reason to linger. Now there was a reason to linger. She would be awake before him sometimes. He would open his eyes to find her sitting in the middle of the room, watching the bedroom doorway with the patient. Absolute attention of someone who has nowhere better to be, and nothing more important to wait for. And when he appeared, when he shuffled to the doorway in his robe and looked at her, her tail would move. Not wildly, not dramatically, just a slow, steady sweep back and forth, like a pendulum measuring out contentment. He started talking to her more. Over breakfast. "You want some of this?" "No, you can't have eggs, I read that. On evenings. I had the strangest conversation today. You want to hear it? Of course you do." Late at night, when the building was quiet and the city outside had settled into its late murmur, just her name, when he had given her one. He had started calling her October. He hadn't planned the name. It had come out of him one evening. "You came to me in October, didn't you?" And she had looked up, and it had simply stayed. October. Out, for short. On the mornings when he was still half asleep and the longer syllables felt like too much effort. Out. The name settled over her like something that had always been hers. She began to follow him through the apartment, not invasively, not underfoot, not pressing against his legs at every step, but with a quiet companionship, the way a shadow follows you without making demands. If he was in the kitchen, she would lie in the doorway. If he moved to the living room, she would follow and find her spot on the blanket, now positioned near the couch rather than the door. A migration that had happened without discussion over the course of about 3 weeks. He took her for walks. Not on a leash at first. He didn't have one. He simply opened the door and started walking, and she walked alongside him, and they moved through the winter streets together in the early morning or the cold Sunday afternoon, their breath making small clouds in the air, their footsteps making the only sound on a block that hadn't quite woken up yet. He bought a leash. Navy blue. She didn't seem bothered by it. He took her to the park and watched her investigate things. The edges of fences, the base of trees, the mysterious messages left by other dogs in the Tuesday morning grass. He watched her move and thought, she's a different animal here than she is at home. More alive, more expressed, her whole body engaged in the project of the walk in a way that was, simply, joyful. He had not thought very much about joy in a while. Watching her, he remembered what it looked like. There was a Sunday in February, gray sky, soft light, the park empty except for them, when he sat on a bench and she came and put her front paws up on his knees and looked at his face from very close. And he put both hands on either side of her face and looked back. "Hello?" he said. Same word he'd said that first cold evening at the door. Her tail moved. He sat like that for a long time. When he got home, he stood in the hallway for a moment and looked at the apartment, the 2 photographs, the coffee maker, the fleece blanket by the couch. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like absence he was looking at. It felt like home. And it had only taken one small, patient, dusty dog to remind him that that was possible. There is a moment in every long and quiet story when something shifts. Not a dramatic shift, not the kind you see coming. It's the kind that only becomes visible when you look backward, when you stand in a later, warmer place and trace the line back to the exact moment when the direction changed. For Marcus and October, that moment came in early March. The city was in the first tentative days of thaw. Not fully spring. The trees hadn't committed yet. Just the faintest suggestion of green at the tips of branches. The kind of green you might question when you first see it, wondering if you imagined it. The sky was higher somehow. The light lasted a few more minutes every evening. You could feel the world making its decision. Marcus had been sick, a winter cold, nothing serious, but the kind that grounds you for a week, turns your apartment into a capsule, makes even the short walk to the kitchen feel like more than you want to manage. He had called in to work on a Monday and Tuesday, slept late, eaten soup from a can, watched more television than he'd watched in the past 6 months combined. October had been extraordinary, not in any way that could be written into a veterinary report. Not demonstrably, obviously extraordinary. But Marcus would remember it. She didn't leave his side. She moved when he moved. When he was on the couch, she was on the couch. That had become accepted somewhere in February. The couch joining the fleece blanket as her official territory. When he went to bed early, she jumped up at the foot of the bed. Also now accepted. Also something that had happened without explicit decision, the way the best domestic arrangements always do. On the second day, when he lay on the couch with a blanket over him and a half-finished cup of tea on the table and the television running something he wasn't really watching, she put her chin on his knee. She didn't ask anything. She didn't move. She simply rested there, that warm, steady weight, and looked at nothing in particular. He lay very still. He felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He put his hand on her head. She closed her eyes. They stayed like that for a long time. The television murmured. The afternoon light moved across the floor. The city outside went about its business, fully unaware of the small and enormous thing happening in a third-floor apartment on Birch Street. When he finally moved, when he shifted to reach for the tea, she lifted her head and watched him, and then settled her chin back on his knee the moment he was still again. She knows, he thought, and he knew this was not a complicated or fully rational thought, but he also knew it was true. He called his sister in Ohio that evening, the first time in months he'd called for no reason other than wanting to talk. "How are you doing?" his sister asked. Actually pretty good, he said, and meant it. You sound different, she said. I got a dog, he told her. There was a beat. Marcus, his sister said. You should have gotten a dog years ago. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that surprises you with itself. That was the turning point. Not the illness, not the phone call. The laugh. The moment he heard the sound of his own uncomplicated happiness and recognized it, and understood that it had been sitting there for months, growing quietly in the ordinary mornings, the evening walks, the sound of breathing in the dark, the weight of a chin on a knee. He had been so focused on what was missing that he had almost missed what had arrived. He took October to the vet the following week. Her first real checkup, blood work, the full examination. She was healthy. Slightly underweight still, but improving. The vet, a calm woman in her 50s who handled October with the practiced gentleness of someone who has never once frightened an animal, said she was perhaps 3 years old, maybe 4. How long have you had her? The vet asked. Since October, Marcus said. The vet smiled. Good name. He drove home with October on the back seat, looking out the window with an expression of what he could only describe as composed interest, the world seen from a moving vehicle clearly being a thing she found worth thinking about. And he thought, this is my dog. Not the way he'd thought it before, loosely, tentatively, with qualifications. This is my dog. Clear and simple and complete. And in the quiet revolution of that simple thought, something that had been broken, not dramatically, not visibly, but genuinely broken, began to mend. There was never one single rescue. That is the thing Marcus would say later when people asked him about it, which they did. Colleagues, neighbors, the woman at the coffee shop who recognized him, and October through the window. Oh, you rescued her? They would say, and he would think about the right way to answer. Because the word rescue suggests a single moment, a clear before and after. A person reaching into a dark place and pulling something out into the light. That's not how this happened. This happened the way rain fills a river. One drop, and another, and another. None of them individually significant. All of them together, everything. It happened the first time he left water on the step. It happened the first time he crouched down and turned his hand palm up. It happened the first time she stepped inside. It happened every morning he refreshed the bowl. Every evening he sat in the doorway. Every Sunday walk through the park. Every night she curled at his feet while he read, and the apartment felt like somewhere a person could breathe. But if there was one day that felt like the formal version, the one he would remember as the completion of something, it was the day in late March when he took her back to the vet for her first round of vaccinations. And in the paperwork, in the line that said owner's name, he wrote his own. It was simple. It was quiet. It was one line of ink on a form, but it meant, I am responsible for you. It meant, you are mine to protect. It meant, you are not alone anymore. He drove home slowly that day. The March light was doing something beautiful, a particular quality that only arrives in late winter transitioning to spring, a clarity in the air, a way the late afternoon gold falls across things it's been absent from for months. October sat in the back seat and watched the city pass. He stopped at the pet store on the way home. He had been buying the minimum, a bag of kibble, a basic leash. Today he spent actual time walking the aisles. He bought a proper dog bed. He bought a better food, a brand the vet had recommended. He bought a collar, a soft brown leather one with a small brass nameplate. He had them engrave it while he waited, Ost Tikaber, and a phone number. He put the collar on her in the parking lot. She sat very still while he buckled it. She shook her head once when it was on, settling it, accommodating it. Then she looked up at him. He crouched in front of her. Her coat had filled out since October. It was still sandy, still that particular warm earth gold, but it lay differently now, smoother, fuller, the ribs no longer visible beneath it. Her eyes were the same, would always be the same, those careful, dark, endlessly patient brown eyes that had chosen him on a Tuesday evening on Burke Street when neither of them had anything left to lose. You look good, he told her. Her tail moved. He stood. He opened the car door. She jumped in, circled once, and lay down on the back seat. He got in the driver's seat and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Outside, the March afternoon continued its quiet work of becoming spring. A woman pushed a stroller on the sidewalk. A delivery truck backed into a space. 2 pigeons moved across a parking space with their characteristic purposeful shuffle. The world unchanged. And yet, He started the car. He had walked into that October evening with an empty apartment and a chest full of something he couldn't name. He was driving home with a dog with a brass nameplate and a bed that cost more than his last 3 haircuts combined. The apartment was waiting for them. It had been waiting, he thought, for a very long time. Spring arrived the way spring always does. Tentatively at first, then all at once. The trees on Birch Street committed to their green. The bakery left its door propped open on warm afternoons, letting the smell of bread drift into the street. Children appeared in the park after school, and the evenings stretched longer and longer until there was still light at 7, then 7:30, then past 8. October loved spring. She loved it with her whole body, the way dogs love things they love. The smell of it, the texture of new grass under her paws, the particular energy of birds reasserting themselves after a quiet winter. She moved differently in the spring air. Her step had a lightness that made Marcus smile every single time. He walked her every morning now. 45 minutes, rain or shine, through the park and along the river path and back through the neighborhood streets. He had lost 7 pounds since October and his back hurt less, and he slept, deeply, completely, in a way he hadn't in years. He credited the walks. He also credited the dog. The two were, he had come to understand somewhat the same thing. He had made friends. This was the thing he hadn't predicted. Or perhaps he had predicted it in the abstract. People tell you when you get a dog that dogs are social anchors, that they open conversations, that the world becomes more porous when you move through it with an animal, but knowing something abstractly and experiencing it are different. There was an older gentleman named Robert who walked a black Labrador named Duke at 7 every morning. Robert had retired from the post office and had strong opinions about the city's road maintenance and remarkable patience for long conversations about nothing in particular. Marcus had come to look forward to seeing him. There was a woman named Diane from 2 blocks over who stopped to pet October every Thursday without fail on her way to her yoga class. She had a warm, direct laugh and had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and knew things about it that Marcus had never bothered to discover. There were others, nods, exchanges, the daily small warmth of being known in a neighborhood. He had lived on Birch Street for 4 years without it. It had taken one small sandy dog to get it. The apartment had changed too. It had things now. A dog bed that October used approximately 40% of the time, and the couch cushion she had claimed the other 60. Chew toys in a small basket near the door. A hook he'd installed in the hallway for her leash, which now lived there alongside his jacket rather than in the closet where all things without daily importance were kept. There were photographs on the wall now too. New ones. October in the park, blurry and golden in the afternoon light. October on the first day of snow last November. Nose down, investigating. October sleeping in the car. October on the couch, looking at the camera with the composed dignity of someone who finds being photographed reasonable but not particularly interesting. He had framed one of these alongside the old photograph of Biscuit. He had looked at them together for a long time. The afternoon he hung it. "Hello, old friend," he thought, looking at the photo of Biscuit. Look who came home. He had called Claire once in April, not to say anything significant, just to catch up. The way you do with someone you once knew very well and now know at a careful, friendly distance. She asked about his life. He told her about October. She said she had a cat now, a Maine Coon named Douglas. They laughed about that. "You sound good," she said. "I am," he said. And he was. Not in the way he might have performed being good in the past. The automatic, reflexive assurance you give people when they ask. He meant it plainly. Simply. He was good. He had begun cooking properly again. He had started reading more. He had accepted an invitation to a colleague's dinner party in May that he would, a year ago, have declined. He had driven to Vermont for a weekend in June and brought October, who had been a perfect passenger and had greeted every hiking trail with a focused enthusiasm that he found genuinely moving. He thought, sometimes, about the person he had been before that Tuesday evening in October. He didn't judge that person. That person was doing his best with what he had. But he was glad he was no longer entirely that person. He was glad he had been walking slowly that evening. Glad he had gone back and opened the door. Glad he had put down a bowl of water. Glad that the smallest, most ordinary gestures turn out to be, sometimes, the most important ones. And glad, profoundly, quietly, glad, for the small sandy dog who had walked behind him through a cool October evening and decided, without any particular reason, that he was worth following home. Some things take time. Not because they're difficult, necessarily. Not because there's something wrong with the person, or the animal, or the circumstances, but because anything worth having requires a certain patience, a certain willingness to let things arrive at their own pace, rather than forcing them to arrive at yours. Marcus thought about this often, in the way you think about things that have rearranged your understanding of the world. He thought about it on October mornings. Appropriate, he always felt, when the air had that particular quality it had on the evening this began. That weight. That coolness. That sense of something ending and something else getting ready to arrive. He thought about the version of himself who had walked home that Tuesday. Who had noticed the dog. Who had told himself she would be gone by morning. He didn't judge that version of himself. He understood him. That man had built walls the way all people build walls. Slowly, reasonably, in response to the experiences that make walls seem like the sensible option. Walls against loneliness, which paradoxically require you to be alone to maintain. Walls against connection, which costs something. Against vulnerability, which is embarrassing. Against hope, which disappoints. They were good walls. Functional walls, but they had been, quietly and thoroughly, the wrong choice. October had walked through them, not with force, not with drama, with patience, with the absolute undemanding patience of a creature who has learned that the best things cannot be rushed and cannot be asked for, only waited for. He had a friend now, a colleague named David, who had become a genuine friend over the past year. The kind of friend you didn't realize you needed until you had one. Who called October the miracle dog. She's not a miracle, Marcus told him. She's just a dog. That's the miracle, David said. Marcus considered this. He supposed David had a point, not in any mystical sense, not in the sense of predestination or fate, or the universe aligning its forces, but in the simpler sense that something ordinary, a stray on a city street, a bowl of water on a step, a door left open, had produced something extraordinary. The restoration of a person to themselves. The reopening of a life that had been quietly, incrementally closing. That was, perhaps, a kind of miracle. He thought, too, about what she had experienced before she found him. He would never know the full of it. He couldn't. But he knew enough. The ribs visible beneath the coat, the careful way she had approached even the smallest offering, the months and months of invisibility on a city street, to know that she had earned her peace. She had earned the dog bed and the leather collar and the couch cushion and the walks along the river and the gentle hand on her head every morning. She deserved it all, and she wore it the way she wore everything, without drama, without excessive display, with a quiet, settled confidence that said, "Yes, this is mine. I waited for it. Now it's here." He sat on the bench in the park one October afternoon, the park bench they had made their own over the months. The one beside the elm tree near the north entrance, and watched her investigate the grass nearby. The trees were turning again. Rust and amber and old gold, the same colors as the year before. The air had that quality again. The one that had started all of this. She wandered back to him after a while and sat beside the bench. He reached down and rested his hand on her back. She leaned against his leg slightly. They sat like that for a long time. The park moved around them. A child on a bicycle, a jogger, two women in conversation, the slow drift of leaves, the distant sound of the city, always present, always indifferent, going about its enormous and ordinary life. He thought about what she had given him. It wasn't just company, though it was that. It wasn't just routine, though it was that too. It wasn't even love, though it was certainly that. It was presence, the radical, uncomplicated act of being fully present with someone. Of asking nothing except that you show up, of giving nothing except that quiet, steady, animal attention, the most honest attention there is. It had reminded him how to be present himself, how to notice things. Light, sound, the temperature of air, the color of leaves, the feeling of warm sun on a park bench in the afternoon, how to live inside the actual moment rather than somewhere ahead of it or behind it. She had taught him that. A dog with no name and no home and no reason to trust the world had walked behind him through an October evening and waited outside his door and looked at him with those patient brown eyes and said, in the only language she had, "I'm here. Are you?" And slowly, imperfectly, non-linearly, in the way all real things happen, He had learned to answer. "Yes, I'm here. I see you. Come in." He stood eventually. She stood with him. He clipped her leash, the good one, the second one he bought, blue and green, to her collar, and they started back along the river path. The afternoon light was doing something beautiful. It usually was, now that he remembered to look. "Come on, Oct," he said. She moved alongside him, and they walked home together, two lives both a little changed, both considerably warmer than they had been 1 year ago on a quiet Tuesday evening on Birch Street, into the last of the autumn light. Some things take time, and some things, when they finally arrive, are exactly as good as they were worth waiting for. Rest now. You're home. You're safe. You're loved. That's enough. That's everything. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something patient you've been waiting for, or someone quiet who changed your world, please leave a like. It takes 1 second, and it means everything. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, slow ones, true ones, the kind that sit with you long after they're over, subscribe to Rescue Diaries. Every week, we tell the stories that don't shout, the ones that whisper, the ones that stay. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves, and take care of the ones who follow you home.